Well, greetings once again from Cooperstown, New York, the site of the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum. Very glad you could join us for another edition of Virtual Voices of the Game. My name is Bruce Markison from the Hall's Education Department. And today, my pleasure to talk to someone who knows Minnesota Twins baseball inside and out. His name is Dick Bremer. Dick has been broadcasting Twins baseball since 1983. And our primary focus of conversation today will be the great Tony Oliva, one of our new Hall of Famers. Before we officially welcome Dick aboard, want to give you a little bit of background on his career. In addition to announcing the Twins for the last several decades, he has done Minnesota Golden Gophers basketball and football and hockey. He's broadcast Iowa Hawkeyes basketball, Minnesota North Stars games as well, and a member of the Minnesota Broadcasting Hall of Fame. We welcome to the Hall of Fame's virtual voices of the game, Dick Bremer. Dick, welcome. Thank you very much for taking time to talk to us today.
Bruce, I'm delighted to be with you and delighted to talk about the subject matter. When Tony and Jim Kaat were officially announced as a member of the 2022 Hall of Fame class, it was a special day, not just for me, but I think for baseball fans all over the upper Midwest.
We have a few pictures of Dick's career over the years. The one on the right is particularly interesting. Looks like a TV Guide ad from the early 1980s or thereabouts. It says, Dick Bremer knows his stuff. You remember that ad?
I do. It was when I was in TV news in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. And I found a copy of that and had it reproduced for my kids as they were growing up much younger. I just wanted to remind my children that I knew my stuff.
Now, the other interesting, or one of the other interesting things I read about you, used to have, I guess, a late night radio show, and they called you the Duke in the Dark.
Yeah. That was when I was in college, and I thought I had left all of that behind me, but then Wikipedia unearthed it again. So, back in the day, disc jockeys oftentimes had nicknames, and they wanted me to have a nickname. I didn't really have any. When your first name is Richard, you got a lot of built-in names, Rich, Ricky, so on and so forth, right? So I had an old NFL model football in my dorm room, and it's called the Duke. And so, long story short, that's how I became the Duke. My air shift was at night, so it became the Duke in the Dark.
Yeah. It must have been fun though, right?
I enjoyed it. I really didn't want to play Bee Gees records for the rest of my life. And so I tried to find a career in sports that I couldn't find as a player. I played baseball, loved it, but didn't play beyond high school. And I wasn't a very good basketball player. And so I decided to leave the disc jockey business and try to get into sports. And the first step that I took was at a TV and radio station in Cedar Rapids.
Yeah. Of course, in more recent years, you've worked with the likes of Bert Blyleven, longtime broadcaster for the Twins, recently retired. And now you work with a variety of former players who are now analysts on the Twins broadcasts. Justin Morneau, LaTroy Hawkins, Roy Smalley, Glenn Perkins, quite a cast of characters that you're involved with in doing the Twins broadcasts on the television side. One other thing I wanted to mention, Dick has a book, terrific book that came out in 2020. It's called Game Used. It's gotten tremendous reviews on Amazon. I want to say dozens of reviews, 5 stars you're averaging. So the book has done nicely for you.
It has. It was. I've never thought that I'd be writing a book, but was new to the process. And of course, asking people who had done a book before, they said, well, one of the fun things is to go to book signings and actually meet fans and all that. And unfortunately, we weren't able to do much of any of that because of the pandemic. Bookstores were closed and all that. But it was a fun project to work on. You know, as a broadcaster, Bruce, you say something, it's out there, and if it's not too notorious, it'll die out there on the air. It's over and done with. But when you write something and prepare something to be written, I found myself going over sentences and paragraphs and stories over and over again. I don't know how professional writers do it, because that part of it was quite formidable in terms of, trying to move on to the next story when I was rewriting the current one so many times.
How long did it take you to write the book?
Pretty much the entire off season a few years ago. And I really enjoyed it, was unsure about how well it would be received, but as you said, the reviews have been pretty good. And I think it's a testament to not me necessarily, but the fan fervor or loyalty for the Twins. But it's very much a Twins centric book, going back to when I grew up in a very small town in western Minnesota as a Twins fan. As I shared with you before we did this show, I have vague memories of the very first Twins game back in 1961. So I followed the team from day one, literally, and now I get paid to follow them. So it's been a blessed career for sure.
Dick, let's go back to December 2021, not that long ago. Your reaction when you heard the news that Tony Oliva had been elected to the Hall of Fame. First off, were you at all surprised? Did you think it was going to happen this year? What was your immediate thought on it?
Well, I became rather emotional. I was gratified to hear Rod Carew a day later saying he became emotional. But first, I believe it was Jim Kaat was announced first, and I just was so happy for him, because I've worked with Jim for many, many years, and he will do some games again on Twins television in 2022. And then when they came to Tony, Tony and Jim have both had to wait so very long. Those of us who watched them play in their prime, both, I think all of us felt here in the upper Midwest, they belonged in the Hall of Fame. They both had to wait far longer than we think they should have. And for them finally to be able to make it, they're both very much alive and vibrant, and we hope fully be able to enjoy the whole experience. It just was a wonderful, wonderful day. And I would say, speaking as a member of a franchise that's won a couple of World Series, that day was one of the best days in Twins history, when we found out that they both were going into the Hall of Fame.
Nice. You also were telling me that you had a chance to visit with Tony and talk to him face to face about this.
Yeah, and he's endeared himself to this region, first as a player. Now he's just been the best ambassador, not just for Twins baseball, but for baseball. He's got such love for the game, and to see in person his face light up in talking about his speech and the whole experience that's going to be laid out in front of him here in the coming months, just was really a lot of fun. I've known Tony a long, long time. Unfortunately, wasn't able to broadcast games while he was still playing, but of course he was a coach with the Twins for many, many years. Here in the upper Midwest, we've had a thing called the Twins Winter Caravan, where broadcasters, former players, current players go out and meet fans, Fargo, Duluth, Bemidji, wherever. And I think for like 10 straight years, I got to spend a wonderful week with Tony on buses and at events all over the upper Midwest. And what's interesting, Bruce, is, I would introduce Tony Oliva at an elementary school in the middle of North Dakota, and people would just cheer and feel so much love for this man. And it's just been wonderful to call him a friend all these years.
Tell us about the first time that you met him. Was it in '83 when you became a broadcaster with the Twins, or had you met earlier?
Yeah, it was as a fan. I came down from college at St. Cloud State when I wasn't the Duke on the dark, or in the dark. And my buddy and I went to a Shakey's Pizza. I don't even know if there are any around anymore. I don't think there are. But we were just enjoying our pizza after the Twins game, and he was there with his family, and I just had to do something. So I bought him a pitcher of pop for him and his family. And of course, he doesn't remember that, but that was where I had my first interaction with Tony Oliva. And since then, I actually got to pitch to Tony years ago at the fantasy camp. I typically go down, and part of the Twins fantasy camp, at least, is the campers, the people who couldn't play, like me, got a chance to pitch against or try to hit against the former Twins. So I got to pitch against Tony And to no one's surprise, first pitch I threw, he hit it off the wall in right center field. Couldn't run very well. He only got a single, but he hit a line drive off of me. And I thought, okay, now that's how Catfish Hunter felt.
That's great. That's great. I want to go back to his early days. He came up to the Twins in the early 60s. Really, his first full year was 1964. It was a terrific year. He ends up winning Rookie of the Year, batted .323 as a rookie, and hit with tremendous power. Had a career high 32 home runs. That's maybe one aspect of his career that's not talked about, the fact that he did have such legitimate power. And really, Dick, in those early years, before he hurt the knees, he was an incredible five-tool talent.
Yeah, and the fifth tool, the fielding and throwing came late. It's interesting. We're all very happy that he's now a big part of baseball history, as he should be. But his career is intertwined with American history. He was signed. He told me once he had vague memories of signing his first contract out of Cuba with the Washington Senators. They had not moved to Minnesota yet. And he came here and, he could hit, of course, but he really was raw defensively. And to that, because of that, the Twins organization looked at him and very early on in the 1961 season, they officially moved to Minnesota in late November of 1960. Early in the 1961 season, they thought, well, this just isn't going to work. We're going to send him back to Cuba. Well, this was days after the Bay of Pigs invasion in mid-April of 1961. The Twins themselves had only played a handful of games, but they made the decision that he had no future in the big leagues. And so their intent was to just get him back to Cuba and whatever. Well, because of the failed military endeavor, the Bay of Pigs invasion, there was an embargo of travel between Cuba and the United States. So he could not go home. And he got a second chance later that year and opened some eyes with his hitting, worked hard on his fielding. And he will tell you, and he may mention it in his speech in late July, he won 3 batting titles. He was the American League Rookie of the Year. But the thing he is most proud of is in 1966, he won a Gold Glove Award because the reputation he had was a guy who could hit, but he would have ground balls go through his legs in the outfield, losing balls in the lights. He was terrible as a fielder, but it's a testament to hard work and working hard to improve a weakness in your game, which he did to the point where in 1966, he won a Gold Glove.
He had a strong arm as well, and he ran extremely well. He wasn't a huge base stealer, but he could certainly steal a base if you didn't keep him close. He could go first to third. So the speed and the arm were big parts of his game as well.
And the speed, of course, was the casualty of the knee injuries that you spoke of. He had just chronic knee problems. And if that happened to a player today, arthroscopically, they could probably, put him back on the field in 4 weeks. Well, that wasn't the case back in the 60s. They had to open the knee up and, it really crimped a part of his game that made him a great all-around player. But nevertheless, the pitchers of his era, and I just talked with Jim Palmer before we did this interview today, because he had to pitch to Tony and Harmon Killebrew and all those guys. And he said, I think somewhat tongue-in-cheek, Jim, of course, a Hall of Fame pitcher and a 3-time Cy Young Award winner, all of that. But he said one of the things he's proudest of, he actually struck out Tony Oliva twice in one game. And we know that didn't happen very often.
That's great. What about this picture that I have up on the screen, Dick? It must conjure some memories for you, even though you were not yet broadcasting. You were a major fan of the Twins growing up. You spent a lot of afternoons and I assume evenings at Metropolitan Stadium. Tell us what you're thinking about as you look at this great old photo.
Well, I see that picture and I see that gold tooth, and that's the same gold tooth that I saw on the mound in Fort Myers trying to pitch to him. There were thousands of us in the 60s who imitated his stance. He would get to the back line of the batter's box and he would dig and dig and dig, and you hardly ever see players do that anymore. But he would dig in, and he would give the pitcher that look. And I asked Tony once, I said, who was the toughest pitcher you had to face? Fully expecting that he would say, Jim Palmer, Sam McDowell, Hoyt Wilhelm, Denny McLean, somebody like that, Catfish Hunter. And I don't even remember who he said was the toughest pitcher he faced, someone who I had heard of, but it wasn't one of the prominent pitchers of his era. And I said, well, what about Catfish Hunter and Jim Palmer and those guys? He goes, oh, I loved facing those guys because I knew I would face them a fourth time. And he said, by the fourth time, I'd have them, and I think that's something only a really great hitter would say, that they wanted to face Catfish Hunter and Jim Palmer a fourth time in the same game.
Sure, those guys were going 8 innings,
Yep.
often pitching complete games.
Right.
And depending on what the Twins did offensively, Oliva might come up 4 or 5 times.
Right.
And he went to school on them. What about that swing? Some of our younger viewers, and maybe not so young viewers as well, maybe haven't seen much video of Tony Oliva, haven't seen the swing. It was picturesque.
It was, and a lot of us also imitated the crescent swing. And as we got ready to face a pitch, Tony had that, and then he would lock that bat back on that left shoulder. And pitchers who faced Tony would say, you might be able to get him out with a down and away fastball, for instance, in the first inning. But if you tried it again in the third or fourth inning, there'd be a double in the left field corner. He was one of the hitters of his era, and there were more of them then than there are now, certainly, that used the whole field. And you might be able to get somebody or him out in an earlier at bat. And if you tried to come back with that pitch in the same location, you ended up backing up third base because he was that good, making adjustments to the pitcher he was facing that particular time.
We hear so much about the launch angle today in baseball. I grew up, the term was an uppercut swing versus a level swing. Do you remember what Tony's swing was like? Was it more level?
I think it was, only because I don't remember him hitting a lot of high fly balls. I remember line drives or hard ground balls, and that's the way hitting was coached back then. The only thing that really mattered was hitting the ball hard someplace, and that included hitting it on the ground. And I know if he were playing today, seems like most left-handed batters now are being shifted. No one would shift Tony Oliva because he did use the whole field, and all he wanted to do was make solid contact with the baseball. And with a career batting average of over 300, he used that to great success in his now Hall of Fame career.
Dick, we see in the background Metropolitan Stadium. This is probably during pregame, not many fans there on this particular afternoon, or at least at that hour. I know that you went to a lot of games at the old Met. Tell us about some of your fond memories there.
Well, the first game, I have vivid memories of it. It was a minor league ballpark built in the hopes that a major league team would eventually come. There was, in the late 50s, the thought that maybe the New York Giants would settle in Minnesota rather than move out to San Francisco. That didn't happen, and the Twins came in 1961. And it's remarkable to think, Bruce, the talent that came on that team. Tony was in the organization, wasn't exiled back to Cuba because of the travel embargo, but the Twins came here with Jim Kaat, Camilo Pascual, Harmon Killebrew, Bob Allison. Tony Oliva was in the organization. Just a wealth of talent. And then with Oliva in the organization, not yet making his big splash as he would in 1964, can't help but wonder if the Washington team had stayed in Washington, what they might have been able to accomplish. You had Bob Allison, a former Rookie of the Year. Harmon Killebrew was a league MVP in 1969. Jim Kaat won 25 games in 1966. Tony was second in MVP voting a couple of times and probably could very easily have won both of those elections. That was a talent-rich roster that came. And then shortly after the Twins' first year, they built the upper deck, made it a more typical big league ballpark. And I have nothing but fond memories. And yeah, when the stadium was torn down to put up a shopping center in Bloomington, Minnesota. It was a pretty sad day for a lot of people.
You mentioned the talent of those Twins teams, and you threw some great names at us. Harmon Killebrew, beloved member of the Hall of Fame. Jim Kaat, Mudcat Grant on the pitching staff. The 1965 team, which wins the American League pennant at that MVP year from the shortstop, Zoila Versailles, just a tremendously good team up and down. So there were a lot of other players who would get publicity along with Tony Oliva. Did Tony become popular with Twins fans right away, or did it take some time, given that there were some more established players around him?
I think he made such a big splash in his first year, 1964, that fans immediately took to him. And to be fair, I think it's fair to say that he was the difference maker. You know, Harmon was here for a few years. Jim Kaat was one of the better left-handed pitchers in the game. But until Tony came in 1964, they didn't have, you know, what they needed to overtake the Yankees, win 102 ball games as they did in 1965. That was a great team. The addition of Mudcat Grant that you mentioned was a key factor on that team as well. But I think people just fell in love with what he did on the field. He was such a tough guy to get out. And when he was hot, and we had Kirby Puckett years later. Kirby was a streak hitter. And when he was hot, you know, 3 doubles a game, not uncommon at all. Well, Tony was that way too. And when he was hot, in talking again with Jim Palmer, he said he remembered a 4-game series in Baltimore and he thought Tony had 12 hits. That was Tony Oliva. When he was hot, nobody, even the greatest pitchers of the time, couldn't get him out.
You know, I think you make a great point about Tony's addition. It helped balance the lineup a little bit. You had Bob Allison, Harmon Killebrew from the right side, Versailles from the right side. In terms of the left side, though, you had Don Mincher, who would strike out a little bit. I mean, not like today's sluggers, but strike out a decent amount for that era. Tony brought another left-handed batter. This was before Carew had arrived.
Right.
Really did give the Twins a different dimension.
In part, too, because it didn't matter whether the pitcher was right-handed or left-handed. He could hit righties and lefties very, very well. But that was the key thing. You're right. The Twins were pretty much a right-handed hitting lineup at that time in terms of impact bats. They also had Earl Batty, their catcher, who was a really good right-handed batter. So the addition of Tony in 1964 set the stage for, a 102-win team in 1965 and his second batting title. And he finished second to his teammate, Zoila Versailles, for the league MVP that year in a very close vote. And again, 1970, he finished second to Boog Powell. So he was, in his prime, one of the best hitters of his era.
Dick, have you talked to Tony about what it was like for him coming to Minnesota in the early 60s? Young kid from Cuba. He's just learning the English language. He's coming to the northern part of the United States. I mean, it's a long way away, different type of culture. Has he talked to you about what that was like?
One of my favorite stories he tells is coming here to the United States. And it was a little bit better, I think, by the time he got to the Twins, but he did work his way through the minor leagues and had to live in a segregated world too back then, knowing just marginal English. And so he claims every morning for breakfast, he would have eggs and bacon because that's all he could say at the restaurant, and then fried chicken at night. That's all he knew. So when he would go to a restaurant, that's what he would have every morning, every day, not because he didn't want to try other things. It's just that's the only English he knew. And how many ball players, Bruce, had to go through that, right? I mean, it wasn't just Tony. These players that came from Cuba, Dominican Republic, Venezuela, Puerto Rico, wherever, so many of them didn't have any command of the English language at all through no fault of their own. And they had to assimilate into our culture and just get by. And Tony has some marvelous stories about how difficult it was for him just to keep himself fed in restaurants or cafes early in his early years here in this country.
Yeah, there were no Latin American liaisons employed by teams. There were no translators. these players were pretty much left up to their own devices to try to make that adjustment. That sort of dovetails into a subject. His name, his real name is not Tony, is Pedro. And I assume the Tony name came after his arrival in the States. Was he receptive about that when he was started to be called that on a regular basis?
Well, the story was that Tony actually used a brother's passport or something like that to get out of the country. Things were pretty restricted in the late 50s, early 60s in terms of Cubans being able to, come over here because Fidel Castro had taken over. And Tony's never really addressed that. I know he still has family in Cuba, but he forever will be known as Tony Oliva here in the Upper Midwest, even though his birth name apparently was Pedro.
Yeah, nobody calls him Pedro, right?
I haven't heard anybody. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know. He looks like Tony Oliva, doesn't he?
Yeah. Here's a great photo from the 1965 World Series. It's really an underrated series. It was hotly contested between the Twins and the Dodgers. Of course, the Dodgers had the two great aces, Sandy Koufax and Don Drysdale. The Twins took them to 7 games. This photo in particular was taken after game 2. Jim Kaat had actually defeated Sandy Koufax. I believe it was a 5-0 final score. Talk a little bit about memories that come back to you when you see a great old photo like this.
Well, I remember all the games were in the afternoon, and I was a schoolboy in Western Minnesota. And our teacher would not allow us to listen to the games or watch them. And I remember running home. The game started at 1 o'clock Central Time. I remember running home to try to catch the end of the games. And all I remember about game 7 was coming home, turning on, or the TV was already on in the house, just in time to see Sandy Koufax shake hands with his teammates after beating the Twins in game 7. But the Twins won the first 2 games at Metropolitan Stadium, lost all 3 in Los Angeles to the Dodgers. In game 6, Mudcat Grant, starting pitcher, hit a 3-run home run. Twins won handily, had all the momentum, and people make a big deal, as they should. Sandy Koufax came back to shut out the Twins in game 7 on 2 days rest. Jim Kaat also pitched on 2 days rest. And the damage that the Dodgers did, they won the game 2-0 on 3 hits on 3 successive pitches, a home run, a double, and a single on 3 successive pitches, I think in the 4th inning. And that was the end of the game in the World Series. The Twins couldn't do anything against Koufax. It was a great World Series. And then the Twins had to wait a long time till 1987 before they get back there again.
We're going to talk later about Jim Kaat, who will be joining Tony in this class of 2022. I did want to mention briefly Bob Allison. You see him on the right. Terrific right-hand slugger, had a streak of about 5 or 6 very productive seasons for the Twins. Then some injuries curtailed his career as he moved into his 30s. Tragically, suffered from a rare disorder called ataxia, died fairly young in 1995. I know that when you were broadcasting the Twins, obviously much later, did you get to know Bob at all?
I did a little bit. And you have to understand that he was my guy as a kid growing up, and the guy for a lot of young boys in the Upper Midwest. A great player. As you know, I've told people before, he was good looking, tall, and athletic, and every boy I knew wanted to be like him. And I grew to 6'2", so I only went 1 for 3. But he was a great player, Rookie of the Year, and it was my pleasure to get the chance to know him a little bit before he got sick, and then in his later years suffering from ataxia. One of the things I'm very proud of is I've been a part of the Bob Allison Ataxia Research Center Board of Directors for most of the last 15 years. And we have a big fundraiser every year. And it's my connection yet to the guy I grew up wanting to be, a great player and such a key figure on those early Twins teams. He and Jim and Tony and Harmon and Camilo and all those guys, for people my age, Bruce, they're so responsible for our love and passion for the game of baseball. So to me, they're all very, very special people.
I didn't realize Allison was that popular in Minnesota. I knew he had a level of popularity, but it almost sounds like he was at the same level of Killebrew.
Yeah, he Harmon, of course, won the home run titles and hit twice as many home runs as Bob, probably by season careers end. But this area is unique in one sense, Bruce. We've got a long baseball heritage here in the Upper Midwest, particularly in Minnesota, with town team baseball. Baseball is a big part of the fabric of the lives of people in the smallest towns. I reference the small town I grew up in. 235 people lived there back in the early 60s, but they had their own baseball team, still do. And there's 85 people who live there now. So baseball was a big part of this region, even before the Twins came in 1961. And I think because of that, all those guys, Lenny Green, I mentioned Earl Batty, Zoilo, Bernie Allen, Billy Martin actually was part of the 1961 Twins team. They're all very, very special to people who were around, who fell in love with the game in baseball, in part because of the Twins coming here in 1961.
You mentioned Billy Martin, and that triggers a question in my mind because I've always found him a fascinating subject. He manages the team in '69, leads them to the American League West title. This is just after the league had been broken into two divisions, but there were a lot of things that went on off the field. Has Tony ever talked about what it was like playing for Billy?
No, I haven't talked to Tony so much about that. I would have a hard time believing Tony wouldn't have nothing but anything but nice things to say about Billy Martin. The guy who talks so glowingly of Billy's influence is Rod Carew. That was the year Rod Carew stole home a record number of times and really was a key force in getting the most out of Rod and making him more of a five-tool player. You don't think of Rod as having great power, but he hit 20 home runs one year and probably could have done that every year if that's what he wanted to do. So Rod really, I think, benefited from having Billy Martin as the manager. That was Harmon Killebrew's MVP year. Harmon spoke glowingly of Billy's influence, but as you said, wasn't on the field that created problems for Billy, both in Minnesota and elsewhere. It was off the field. So his tenure with the Twins lasted just 1 year.
These are some images that I really remember about Tony Oliva. I grew up with baseball in the early 70s. The 72 top set was the first set I collected. You can see the great 72 card there signed by Tony Oliva. And then an action shot of him. I believe that's an all-star game because it's on the turf. And there are some red, white, and blue banners in the background. He was still a very, very effective player, a dominant player going into 1970, 71. And then he hurts his knee in the middle of the 71 season. And it was shaping up as his best year ever, even better than what he had done in 64 and 65. He ends up missing 30 games. He does come back. And his final numbers are very, very good. 337 average, 556 slugging percentage for the season. But he's really never the same ball player after that 71 injury. Talk a little bit about that, if you would.
Well, he had dealt with the bad knees toward the latter half of that season. And you mentioned the 337 average. That still won the batting title that year. So hitters are always talking about their legs, how important they are, to their swing. And it starts with their legs and all of that. Can you imagine being hobbled on one leg as he was for the balance of the 71 season? And then later in his career too. And then the DH came along and that prolonged his career a little bit because he no longer had to be out in the field. He hit the first home run as a designated hitter. So he was able to continue to play and hit. But yeah, in terms of him being effective all the way around, the knees really, really crimped his career.
Was he able to have surgery, or was that just something that wasn't done that regularly?
Multiple surgeries. And again, as I said, when, if those injuries had occurred currently or recently in the last 10, 15 years, it's entirely plausible that, arthroscopically, they could have repaired the knee and he could have gone on and picked up another 1,000 hits perhaps. Yeah. But that wasn't the case back in the late 60s and early 70s.
You mentioned the designated hitter, which comes into play in 1972, and that was a perfect fit for Tony. Although it's interesting, a lot of other veteran players of that era who became DHs hated it because they hated sitting around. They wanted to be out in the field. Tony, though, was a different situation simply because of the knees.
Yeah, there really wasn't much of a choice. The Twins were really damaged, if you will, because Tony was dealing at the end of his career with his knees. Harmon Killebrew wasn't the effective player he was. Rod Carew was starting to emerge as, a perennial batting champion during that time. But they really missed the 3-4 combination that they had a few years earlier with Tony hitting third and Harmon hitting fourth, and sometimes the reverse if it was, a left-handed pitcher, Tony would maybe bat fourth. But it was kind of a double whammy, if you will. Harmon was toward the end of his career, and Tony's knees were damaged to the point that his end was just a few years down the road too.
Well, his knees obviously were a problem. One thing I've noticed looking at images from Tony in his later years, physically didn't look that much different, didn't seem to put a lot of weight on as some players do in their 30s. He was able to maintain pretty good conditioning, even though he obviously had those major knee problems.
And I joked with him about it once when he told me the story about fried chicken every night. I said, "You don't look like you had too much fried chicken." He looks like he took care of himself. Players, I think, typically did that even back then. The thought was, regardless of how good of a year you had, say in 1971, if you didn't take care of yourself, there were a whole bunch of people in spring training in 1972 trying to take your job from you. So Tony did a nice job doing what he could to take care of himself. And toward the end of his career in the mid 70s, if he probably could have fit into his rookie uniform if the Twins had kept it.
Dick, one of the great images I found in preparing for this program is this one. Tony is a coach by this point. I believe this is late 70s, and we see him and Rod Carew. We don't see their faces, but we see the names side by side. It's a great image. I would subheadline this, the pitcher's nightmare, in a sense, even though Tony was not playing at this point in time. I'm curious about the relationship between Tony and Rod. Oliva came first, Carew came after. Was Oliva a mentor to Carew? What was their relationship like?
Very much so. In fact, Bruce, as you know, back then players had roommates. These two guys roomed together for 11 years.
Wow.
11 years sharing stories, critiquing each other's swings. And you look at that picture. Tony Oliva won 3 batting titles. Rod Carew won 7, all in a Twins uniform. Can you imagine the stories they could tell if you were lucky enough to be invited to the hotel room and just talk baseball with those two guys? 10 batting titles. They roomed together for 11 years. And Rodney will tell you, if he hasn't already, Tony was a big, big factor in both technically the baseball swing, developing as a hitter, as Rod so wonderfully did, but also how to conduct yourself off the field and the things you needed to do, how to prepare for a game and all of that. I mean, it really is remarkable to have 10 batting titles out of one hotel room, and they, to this day, are the best of friends. And that's why, as I think I shared with you, Rod admitted he was pretty emotional too when he found out that Tony was going into the Hall of Fame.
Dick, I wanted to mention a couple of milestone occurrences that have taken place after Tony's playing days, but I'm sure they're days that you remember. Go back July 14th, 1991. Hard to believe it's 31 years ago, but that was the day that the Twins franchise officially retired Tony's uniform. So his number 6 not worn since then. You must remember that day.
I do, because the Twins, as part of the ceremony, Tony was still the hitting coach back then for the Twins. Mm-hmm. So the Twins had Kirby Puckett, number 34, whose number also would be retired by the Twins, run out to the left center field wall at the Metrodome and pull down the sheet that was covering the retired number 6. Mm. And I can still see Kirby running out there thinking someday he's going to have his number retired. And it was 1991. That was also the year Rod was inducted into the Hall of Fame. And so sure enough, Kirby had his number 34 retired. And he would tell you if he were with us too, that the power that he developed as a hitter that made him a Hall of Fame player. Speaking of Kirby Puckett now, he owes at least some of that to Tony Oliva, who suggested Kirby ought to try a leg kick to generate a little bit more power rather than hitting ground balls to the right side all the time.
Interesting. Did not know that. When Tony's number was retired, he was the third Twin to have that honor. The first were Killebrew and Carew. Since then, that threesome has been joined by Ken Herbeck, Puckett, as you mentioned, Bert Blyleven, and the one manager, Tom Kelly, also having his number retired. The other celebratory event that I wanted to talk about was April 2011, and that's when the Twins unveiled one of these incredible bronze statues that is near the entrance at Target Field, which was newly opened at the time. I was mentioning before we went on the air that I had a chance to go to an all-star game at Target Field, loved it there. One of the things I loved, these statues, and Tony is well represented in that area.
Yeah, and for fans who haven't been to Target Field or those who plan on coming this year, it really is worth it to walk around the ballpark and see Harmon Killebrew's statue, Rod Carew's statue, Kent Herbeck's, Tony Oliva's. We've been a region that's had Major League Baseball now for just over 60 years, but it's been a pretty rich history, and I think the statues represent that. I suspect we'll probably eventually have a statue of Joe Mauer as well. He had his number retired a couple of years ago as well, but we've been lucky to have some really great players in a relatively short period of time here in the upper Midwest. And that's why I think the fan base is pretty devoted to their team here in this region.
I've always gotten the sense Tony is a pretty humble, pretty modest guy. And I can only imagine how he'd react to a statue. He'd be like, why are they doing this for me?
Well, you saw the smile with the gold tooth. I can imagine a grin from ear to ear. And that's what people, I think, will remember Tony for those who never got a chance to see him play and see what an accomplished, productive hitter he was. He's just got the most wonderful, engaging personality. People love being around him. I mentioned the elementary school kids going crazy when he'd be introduced at a school assembly. He's the most affable person, most approachable person. There are probably more baseballs in the upper Midwest here signed by Tony Oliva than those that haven't been signed by Tony Oliva. He's just so fan friendly, and that's why I've always maintained he's the best ambassador Twins baseball's ever had.
It seems most appropriate that this year Tony will be going in with his longtime Twins teammate Jim Kaat. We're going to talk about Jim extensively, and I know that you know Jim and Tony both very, very well. What do you think it means to each of them to go in with an ex-teammate?
I think it means an awful lot because as I visited with Tony a few weeks ago, he had just gotten off the phone with Jim. I suspect there have been a lot of phone calls back and forth. I just couldn't be happier for both of them, not just because of what they've meant to those of us who, have become passionate about Major League Baseball in this region, just for what they've meant to the game. Now, Jim, of course, has had a tremendous second career as a broadcaster. I've worked games with him and will work again in 2022, 10 or 12 years. I've worked with him a couple of different stints. I just couldn't be happier for both of them. And you guys in the Hall of Fame now, you do what you want to do, but if you do it this way, it would be fitting for those of us in the upper Midwest. If when it comes time to bring these gentlemen to the podium finally for their induction speeches, if you just go alphabetically, if you brought Jim Kaat to the podium to give his acceptance speech, his induction speech, he would be Twins Hall of Famer number 5, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you bring then Tony to the podium, he would be Twins Hall of Famer number 6, which is the uniform that he wore. So you guys do what you want, but both those of us in the upper Midwest, we would take note of that.
I can make the recommendation. They don't often listen to me, but I'll tell them it comes from you. That might mean more. I agree with you about Jim Kaat in terms of his broadcasting. He's become my favorite color announcer in recent years. known as Kitty, very distinctive pitching motion for the Twins and then for later for the White Sox and the Phillies, among other clubs. You talked earlier about how fans in Minnesota would imitate, copy Tony Oliva's swing. Did fans of that era also imitate Jim Kaat's pitching motion?
I don't think so.
No?
He was left-handed for one thing. I was right-handed. Most people are right-handed. It could have been. I don't think I even saw a left-handed pitcher until I was in high school, and by then Jim was, I think, pitching for the White Sox. But you know, he was such a great athlete who happened to be a baseball player, right? I mean, he was a hitter. He could hit really well. The Twins used him as a pinch runner many times. He was just a great athlete, and he just happened to be a baseball player and got paid to get major league hitters out for 25 years. You know, that's a long time, and his roles changed, of course. Mentioned that he won 25 games in 1966, and then toward the end of his career was primarily a relief pitcher. But what a 283 wins, Bruce. That's a lot of wins, and was part of the key early Twins teams that those of us here in the upper Midwest grew to love.
A lot of fans today, including myself, lament the rather laborious way that pitchers work today. 20, 25, 30 seconds between pitches. We know that Jim Kaat was the diametrical opposite of that. I'm curious, though, as a broadcaster, Dick, somebody like Kaat, who pitched so quickly, would that throw off your timing? Does that make it difficult for you?
Not really. We've had some guys who were pretty quick workers here in my broadcasting tenure. Kevin Tapani years ago was a pretty quick worker. Brad Radke was a pretty quick worker. You know, and the guys who work quickly will tell you, look, I don't want my fielders standing around in between pitches. I want to, you know, keep the pace going. And the fielders all will tell you that they appreciate that when they're out in the field. And it's amazing to me that more pitchers don't do that. I understand, you know, the game right now, the pitching game focuses on velocity, and they're focused on recovery time between pitches, so you can, you know, retain or regain some velocity. But boy, the game sure was much quicker to watch back then when guys just got the ball and threw it. I mentioned the 65 World Series. Now, part of the reason that games are longer now, let's be honest, is baseball. That's my industry, so I got to be careful how I put this. But the 1965 World Series, 7 games, and I think the longest game was 2 hours and 20 minutes.
Wow.
And it's because whether it's Koufax, Drysdale, Grant, Kaat, whoever's pitching, you got the ball, you took a second, you looked in for the sign, and you pitched the next one, you know, and we're not there anymore. And it really starts on the mound when the pitcher is ready and delivers the ball. And we had more recently Mark Burley of the White Sox, principally with the White Sox. He was a very quick worker. He got it. He understood. And so maybe we'll get back to that point at some point, and we'll find magically that the length of games shrinks because of it.
Dick, tell me about the first time that you met Jim Kaat.
It was at Harmon Killebrew's Hall of Fame induction in 1984. I think I shared with you before that, you know, how lucky am I? I've had 5 of my broadcast partners inducted into the Hall of Fame, starting with Harmon in 1984, Bert in 2011, a couple of years before that, Paul Molitor, Jack Morris a few years ago. Jack and I have done games for like 15 years, and now Jim Kaat. I was sent by my broadcast outlet at the time in 1984 to go and do some interviews to cover Harmon's induction in 1984. And I remember meeting Jim in the lobby of the Otesaga Hotel, interviewing him. I interviewed Early Wynn, Sandy Koufax, Al Kaline, some of the other contemporaries of Harmon's. But Jim was the first interview I did. His playing career had just ended, and he was just starting broadcasting. And now here he is all these years later, still broadcasting and finally going into the Hall of Fame.
Do you talk to Jim at all about the art of broadcasting?
Absolutely. I've learned an awful lot from him, you know, and I, you know, he and I worked together in the early to mid 90s for several years, and now the last few years again. And, you know, the thing that makes him such a great broadcaster, and he'll be, I suspect, eventually the only guy to be in the Baseball Hall of Fame, who also will have won the Ford Frick Award. But, you know, the thing that makes him so great as an analyst, he loves baseball. He's a baseball historian. But as I said before, he could do it all. 16 gold gloves. Obviously, he could field and throw a little bit. He was used as a pinch hitter, as a pinch runner, has 283 lifetime wins. So, boy, as an analyst, I don't know what the comp would be in the NFL. Somebody who played offense and defense and kicked field goals. This guy did it all. Yeah. That's why he's been such a good broadcaster.
We still have a few minutes left with Dick Bremer, longtime Minnesota Twins voice, has been broadcasting Twins games since 1983. And we're not going to have people go to the phones as they used to do on Dick's old television or radio show back in the day. We'll have our version of the phones is our chat room. Go to the chat box, the chat room. You can type in your comments or questions there. Dick, we have a comment from Scott Blake, one of our regular followers. Scott writes, I met Tony Oliva near his car in the Metropolitan Stadium parking lot after a game in '66. Dick, do you know if he still has his gold Ford Mustang?
I'm guessing he probably doesn't. And he probably wishes he had held on to that car. It's probably worth 10 times more than what he paid for it. No, Tony's got a contemporary vehicle, and I'm sure he is meeting someone outside his car in the parking lot. I'm sure he greeted them with a smile and probably an autograph as well.
We had a question from Robert Ewing talking about the language situation. Tony, obviously, his first language is Spanish. English is his second language. Is he going to deliver his speech in English to the crowd at the Hall of Fame? My understanding is that, yes, he will do that. He might do it in Spanish as well. That's become a recent custom. And we should point out, Dick, that Tony is still active. He does the Spanish language broadcasts for the Twins, even in his 80s.
Yeah, he has done it in recent years. I expect he'll be back again in 2022 to do a package of about 50 games, home games only. But, you know, it's great for Tony, but it's great for all of us too, speaking as a member of the media and the fans who 50 times a year at least get a chance to talk with him, ask questions. You know, I asked him, you know, regularly ask him about the bats he used. He used one bat for a right-handed pitcher, another bat for a left-handed pitcher, and he's just a delight to talk to, and that he's able to be around at least 50 times at Target Field is a blessing, not just for me, but for everybody else that gets a chance to come in contact with him.
And he's still very well recognized, even by the younger fans.
Yep, and if he walks through the concourse, you know, everybody wants a high five or a picture, and I've yet to, as much as I've been around him, I've yet to see him turn anybody down.
Not surprising, not surprising. Dick Bremer has been our guest talking about the great Tony Oliva, also Jim Kaat, two of our new members of the Hall of Fame's class of 2022. Our induction is coming up on July 24th. I hope Dick will be able to make it to Cooperstown. Still trying to work out some of those arrangements. Maybe I'll put out a guest room for Dick if necessary, but we'll have to work on that. Dick, it's been a pleasure. First time we've had a chance to talk. I very much enjoyed it.
Well, same here, Bruce. And again, the Twins have always been well represented in Cooperstown, and we're just thrilled beyond belief that our Twins Hall of Fame class grew from 4 to 6 in 2022.
Well, Dick, we really do appreciate the time. We hope you'll be active soon down in spring training. And then after that, the regular season. I remain ever the optimist. I hope you are as well.
I just peeked outside. We have blowing snow here in the Twin Cities. So, yeah, nobody wants to get to Fort Myers, Florida any more than I do.
Dick, thank you very much. Really appreciate your time.
You got it, Bruce. Anytime.
Longtime Twins broadcaster Dick Bremer talking about Tony Oliva, one of our new Hall of Famers in 2022. We want to thank all of you for joining us as well. Virtual Voices of the Game from Cooperstown, New York. Have a great day, everyone. Take care.